Hey everybody, David R. Becker here with Becker Art, and today I want to go over soft edges in watercolor. It's one of those things I really been bringing up a lot to my students is that you have to learn how to do soft edges. It's one of the things, the way to control the watercolor, and it is hard, but there are so many different ways of doing it. But the most important way is what I'm going to show you here, and I'm going to show you all kinds of different ways of doing soft edges. All right. So we're going to start out with wet into wet. It's one of the easiest ones to do. Just take, and anytime the paper is wet, you're going to get a soft edge. So every time you actually paint in watercolor, you're making soft edges. Though sometimes when you're doing like an apple or something and you have hard edges around it, that's hard, but inside the apple would then be soft edges. And it's called wet into wet, and that's floating your pigment. And you've heard that, if you've been with me, you've heard that before many, many times, float your pigment. And so let's just say we're going to put down here, we put some water, right? We just put water. And then we just take any color. It doesn't matter if you're using gouache or if you're using watercolor. It all works the same. Wet into wet is when you put the paint into the water. So this edge will never be hard edge when you put it into water. Now controlling that edge to how far it goes, and how far it spreads, all depends on what pigment you put down and how much water you have on your paper. So if I put a lot of water on here, it's just going to spread out a lot, right? It's still going to be soft edge, but it will spread out a lot. And this is where you learn how to control those soft edges. This is all wet. That's going to be a soft edge. How do you control it is by how much pigment you put into this. Look, I'm absorbing the pigment back up into my brush. And so there's a really soft edge. This is really light, very light. This is just a tint. And when I use a lot of paint, I call that a wash. And so if I want to make it, a soft edge, but kind of a harder soft edge, again, the more pigment I put into my brush, and there's still the same amount of water down there, and that's how you get the really, really harder soft edge. And there's a lot of times when you have, like, let's say you're working on dry paper and you want to get the soft edge. So wet in the wet is one way of getting it. The second way is when you're doing a hard edge like this, on dry paper. So that's wet paper, that's dry paper. So see how hard my edge is? And so there's a couple different ways of doing this. One is by taking water, and this I learned from Don Andrews just recently, is that you put the water like over here, put it a little bit farther away, and then slowly but surely hit that hard edge. See how you just hit the hard edge? You don't put it right on the edge, because then it keeps on getting wider, and we don't want it wider, because if I do that on the top, let me just show you. Again, let me just first make this wet, or this hard edge. So if I put the hard edge right here, and I wet it up to there, now it's just going to spread downwards into that, but it's still staying right on that line. If I do the wetness and I put water right on that line, like if I just go like this, then I'm pulling the paint, and it's almost too dry already. I'm pulling it and going to make the line farther away. So the best way to, when it's actually dry, and let's do this again because this paper is drying really fast. So let's say again, a hard edge. Down here it's wet now, but see, what I do is I do a little bit farther away from. I take clear water, put it over here, and it's not clear completely because there's a little bit of blue in my brush. But I take it and I put it farther away, and I bring it to the hard edge line, and then just let it bleed into that. And hopefully you have enough pigment, and you'll know how much pigment you have by how much is going to bleed into that area. So that's wet into wet, wet on dry, and then creating it afterwards. Again, do not do this. Do not go in with the brush, and so here it is on dry. There's dry, right? What you want to not do is take your water and put it right on this line, because see how it just keeps on going wider? It gets wider, so your line is not, it's not going to be where you wanted it to end up. Instead, again, do it farther over here. Take the water, bring it out beyond that, and then bring it up against it. And then it'll just kind of go a little bit, depending again how much water you put down and how much pigment you put down in the first place. See how that's a soft edge now? So soft edges, don't put it on the line with water. You can also soften an edge, like on hard. Let's say hard, and then you can, a lot of times I see people spray with a mister, when they want to just do an area and just kind of get it soft, and actually it makes it wet in the wet, but this mister, you have to wet it quite a bit. And then what it's gonna do is it's gonna take and soften the edge automatically. See how it's just softening it by putting water on it, spraying water on it. Little by little, it'll get it wet around there. Though I can help it along a little bit, but again, going beyond it. But look at how now it's really running, because I put so much water on it, it's just running out of there. So that's not a good way of controlling it, and it's just, if you had like a big area and you just wanted to just bleed all over, and so that's one way of doing it. So when it comes to wet into wet, that's the best really. It's basically water, put the water down first, and then again applying it into the water, applying your paint into the water. Look at that, and depending on how much pigment to water ratio you have, it'll determine how far it spreads. All right, so that's one way. There is also this different kind of brushes that you can use to get softer edges, and one is a hake brush, or hakey. Some people call it hakey. And what you can do with this is when you're putting down the pigment, and actually you can do this after your painting is already finished too. You can go back into a painting, but let's say I'm putting a hard edge down there. Again, let's just put a hard edge down here. And then I want to soften it. I can just take the hake brush and keep it dry, don't ever wet it. And then you just wisp it into the areas. You kind of do this, when it's like kind of wet. See how it's just, so I'm softening the bottom there, because that was wet right there. Now it's hard if it's not wet. So you're just going to, let's say if I wet this area down here with just clear water. My water's not so clear anymore because of the, but then I take that and I just brush it into that. And again, this is I can do on a surface that's already been painted. So let's just take, for instance, this painting right here. And let's say I want to soften these right here. I want to soften that edge. This has long been dry a long time ago. I have mirror masking fluid. Oh. So right here, let's say I want to take that and soften that edge. You can take your hake brush, and what I would do is take clear water. This is a little bit blue now because I've been using all blue. But I'm just going to put a little bit of water on here. Just put the water. Don't disturb it. Just lightly brush the water on there. And then take your hake brush. Again, this painting has been dry for, I think, a year. But this is one of the paint-alongs that we did I think last year or so. It's been a while since we did this this painting. And so I'll take my hake brush now, because that part is wet. And you can, you can tickle it with your brush here a little bit. You can do that. You can use a scrub brush. But the best I find is to use the hake brush. And then just real lightly go across it. And just, I'm wiping on my towel here. I'm wiping on my towel, so I'm not picking up water. I'm just taking and rubbing and scrubbing, or just lightly blending. I'm lightly blending, and it's turning it soft, right? It's just going to soften the edge. John Lovett was the one who taught me how to do this. He takes white paint and puts white gesso on there, and then just blends it in. So if you put a color into that, you can blend it into that area. So he would take white, and so let's just take a little bit of white. He would like lay it in there, and then he would just brush it into the painting, and it'd be like, he'd make it like a softness over an area. He would just take it and soften that area. Again, just another way of softening an area, and maybe a different kind of effect you're going to get. You try to get. I know it kind of takes away all of what was there, but that's like blurring it basically. You can also take your brush. You can take your brush and lightly rub an area that's been already done, and tickle it. Wet it and then tickle it. Like just rub it a little bit. There's a bunch of brushes, hake brush hairs here. And so I can just rub it like this, and then what you're doing is you're picking up the paint from below, and then just tickle it and just rub it around a little bit, and it will soften that area too. Another way of softening an edge and making it blurry. So a lot of times when I'm telling my students, I don't want to see any hard edges in a certain area, and I want it to look just like it's just blurred, instead of having to make a soft edge, but really blurring it so you don't identify what the shape is there at all. It's like out of focus. So if photographers make things out of focus, you as an artist can do things out of focus too by just blurring it and making it soft edge. So now this doesn't, it makes your eye go right into the background. So that's another way. There is scrubbing with a scrubber brush. Like if you take a more of a acrylic brush, like a little bit stiffer brush, here's like a stiffer brush, and you wanted to make a soft edge by pulling stuff out. And so there are ways of pulling paint away. So let's say I wanted a soft edge flower. Like these are all hard edges because it was masking fluid. Let's say I just want to put a little one there. I'm just going to take a little bit of water, lightly tickle, and you can actually do this with a watercolor brush too. You don't even need, depending on what kind of paper you're using. But see, I'm just going to tickle it a little bit. Take paper towel and just dab it, and see how I got a nice soft edge. It's a soft edge one, and again, depending on how much you want to take away, you won't rub as much. So let's take just a little bit away. So let the water rest there a little bit, punch it up, and see how you have a little bit of a line there. So it's another way of softening an edge after the fact. The way of getting it while it's wet and you're doing the painting is just definitely wet in the wet. But even if you didn't do the wet in the wet, you can still go back in. Let's say I want to soften that edge right there. It's totally dry without using a Hake brush, but just using a regular watercolor brush and tickling it. I can just go up here and I can just wet it lightly, and then just tickle it. Now on my Stonehenge Aqua, it works really, really well. So I can just see there, I can just tickle it real lightly, just really lightly. And you can also take, and if you want to get it lighter, you can just dab it with a paper towel. But see how you can just rub a little bit. So another way of getting a soft edge is not a great way of getting a soft edge because it looks kind of overworked a little bit, depending on how much of that you do. Like if I want to get rid of this paint right here on the side. But see, you can always take out. It's no problem to scrub something out. Even along little lines, like little soft edge lines, just real lightly go back and forth with your brush. And see, I got a little line right there. It's just a little line. So yeah, that's another way of just basically something that's already been hard edged and it's already dry and it's been there for many years. Okay, so another way. So that's scrubbing a dry surface. We talked about the Hake brush. We got wet in the wet. Sterling Edwards used to sell a brush, and I think he probably still does, and I cannot find the one we traded. I traded Sterling Edwards a brush, and it was basically a bristle brush, and he would use that to get his soft edges. You know, he would just go across it with this. It's like this, it's kind of like this with a bristle brush, but cut kind of short. And he would take this brush, and it worked really well with getting a soft edge by just putting in the water, and you wet his brush. So I just go like that, and he would wet it's not his brush, and it's probably not going to work as well, but it was a short little bristle brush, and he would just take across like this, and it would just take it right across, and it stayed the line because it wasn't adding that much water, but it somehow put water down a little bit, and then it was just get the soft edges. That's a Sterling Edwards brush. And it's just one of those things I have to mention because I'd gotten it and it was really kind of cool. I'm not sure what I did with it. It's probably in my art bin somewhere, one of the art bins, but couldn't find it. All right, and then the final way of doing a soft edge, and it's more mechanical, is using a atomizer or a airbrush. And so an airbrush makes a very soft edge, and so I have one that's this little box right here. It's not a portable one like I had showed you a couple times. I'm liking this one better now than the portable ones because the portable ones seem to really go bad after a while, and they're battery charged. And so this one I will always be able to use because a lot of times I don't use it, and then when I go back to my battery one, it may be not charged. And so I find this kind of one with the cord and with the the long hose, that's fine, and I find that to be just as good. And so if I want to get a soft edge, I just take and I put some water on my palette, take a color. Let's do a bright opera. And this is gouache. I can do it with either gouache because gouache is very pigmented. Holbein gouache is so pigmented, it's unbelievable how pigmented. So I'm just going to take that, rub my brush across here, pick up this water with a little bit of paint because this again is so concentrated, the gouache. I can also use watercolor. I can use here's the watercolor. I can do that too. It's just is not as pigmented, the watercolor, because gouache is made to cover really well, and so transparent watercolor is not made to cover. It's made for show transparency. So I like to use the gouache in my airbrush, and I can just put a little bit of paint. A little bit of paint goes a long way. I put it into my brush. I turn on the air compressor, which is a small little one, and then I just sit there and make a nice soft edge. And by the way, this paper, and of course I put the painting on top of that, so that's when we got those little marks in there. But this paper is really cheap paper. I didn't use a good sheet of paper to demonstrate this, but you can do this on any kind of paper, even mat board, depending on if it's wet or dry. See, now this is really soft, right? Because I'm just doing a soft edge. One way of getting a soft edge is just by using a airbrush. Yeah, look at that. I'm just getting a soft edge. And so you can take that into your painting, and you can also make a hard edge, right? You can make a hard edge by taking, like I was doing before, you take a hard edge and then just right here, soft on one side and hard on the other, right? So that'd be a hard edge, soft edge. And again, this is also since we're talking soft edges, but there's also hard edges, and I've been finding that by taking, you know, my $1 and a quarter Dollar Tree, I'm not sure what they call this, straight edge for plastering or something. It's in the hardware section at the Dollar Tree, and so it's $1.25, but you can just go like this and you're doing a hard edge. Look at that. You can get a nice hard edge. Again, and this side will be soft. So what do? You wet it a little bit farther ahead, and bring it into that. Now there's still pink in my brush, but that's how you get another soft edge. Hard edge, soft edges. Learn how to do wet into wet. That's the most important part. Yes, there's so many different ways of getting it. You know, the hake brush. You know, and I've got this kind of hake brush too. Oops, got a bunch of the hake brush. We got the hake brushes. We got the airbrush to get soft edges, and we've got our bristle brush, our bristle brush that you can scrub a little bit with. Regular brushes, and but again, the best way is still wet into wet. Wet the surface, and apply pigment into that surface. Look at that. And then control it with the amount of pigment you have, and you'll be all good to getting soft edges. Now I'm teaching you how to do really soft edges this week, because this week on Thursday we are going to be painting a nice little cat, a kitty, and it's very, very soft. And so there's a lot of fur on dogs and cats. If you're doing a dogs and cats, or even anything that's fuzzy or blurry, to get a soft edges. And so we're doing a cat, so we're going to have to learn how to do a little bit of soft edges and wet into wet. And it's really something I really, always teach all my students firsthand, because you really need to do that all the time, because you're always working in a wet wash, right? You're always using water, sometimes on a hard edge when it's dry, but when it's wet, let's say this big area is an apple, the outer edge is hard, but inside here, you can control that pigment by the amount of pigment you use, and it's going to be soft edge. You can push it around a little bit, but you don't have to ever soften an edge by blending. You don't do the blending. You let the watercolor blend itself. You can help it along a little bit, so you can just help it along, but the soft edge happens on its own into a wet and wet surface, or those other things I was talking about. All right, so we'll see you Thursday to paint a cat. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.